Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to completely reframe a concept that has, honestly, dominated human imagination for millennia. We're looking at the idea of hell. But listen, we aren't just dusting off ancient dogma here. We're unpacking classical literature and early theology to show how this concept actually, and I mean perfectly, describes our modern daily struggles with isolation and disconnection. If you think you know what the underworld is all about, well, prepare to have your perspective entirely shifted. Seriously, take a second right now and ask yourself, how do you picture hell? It's funny, whenever this question is asked in a room full of people, things usually get really quiet. It's kind of an uncomfortable topic, right? Most of us immediately default to those classic medieval paintings. You know the ones. Underground caverns, pitchforks, unrelenting heat, the whole shebang. But we have to ask, is that really the most terrifying environment you can imagine today? Let's contrast that traditional view with something a bit more relatable. We've all got this inherited, almost cliched cultural imagery of physical fire and burning brimstone. But think about the modern mind. Think about what actually drains you and terrifies you today. It's an environment of endless noise, constant distraction, total chaos, and just overwhelming confusion. What if the truest definition of hell isn't a physical pit of fire at all, but a state of unrelenting sensory and emotional overload? Section 1, Dante, Milton, and Pandemonium. To really understand this shift from a physical location to a psychological state, we have to look at the master architects of our cultural imagination, the great poets, specifically Dante Alighieri and John Milton. They didn't just write scary stories, they fundamentally coded how we understand the underworld. Let's start with Milton. In his epic Paradise Lost, he introduces a word that we still use all the time today, but we almost always forget its origin. The word is pandemonium. Milton coined this term to describe the palace built by the fallen angels. Literally translated, pan means all, and, well, you know what demons are, so it's the place where all the demons gather. But here's the kicker. Milton didn't describe it as some medieval torture chamber. He described it as a place of absolute chaos, disorder, deafening noise, and relentless distraction. Does that sound familiar? Because it perfectly mirrors the dizzying anxiety of our hyper-connected, always-on modern world. Now, what's really interesting about this quote is how it completely flips the script. Milton makes it incredibly clear that hell is less of a physical zip code and much more of a mental condition. The mind is its own place. We carry our environment with us. We have the terrifying power to take a beautiful situation and turn it into an absolute nightmare of our own making, simply through our own perspective and our own isolation. And here is the tragic flaw of human nature that Milton captures so brilliantly. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Why on earth would anyone choose the chaos of pandemonium? Well, because in that chaos, the ego gets to be in charge. We often prefer to be these egocentric mini-monarchs in our own private, isolated worlds, calling all the shots, rather than humbly submitting to and serving a broader, connected community. Dante takes a slightly different, but completely complementary approach in his Divine Comedy. He structures hell geographically. He maps it out in 7 distinct layers or circles, going down deeper and deeper. And who do you think he puts at the absolute lowest, most miserable circle? Actually, scratch that. It isn't the thieves. It's not the violent. It's the betrayers of connection. It's people like Brutus and Judas, those who severed the ultimate bonds of trust and relationship. For Dante, the ultimate punishment is the absolute freezing isolation of broken connections. Section 2. Hell as self-imposed isolation. We see this theme emerging from both poets. It's all about separation and ego. Let's move from these grand literary landscapes to how this actually translates into the daily, self-imposed isolation we experience right now. It happens the exact moment we decide to make ourselves the absolute center of the universe. There's a striking, almost absurd observation in Dante's work. He notes that the lost souls aren't being dragged into the underworld kicking and screaming against their will. No, instead they're shoving and pushing each other, literally hurrying to get through the doors. It's a profound metaphor. We actively rush toward this self-centered isolation. We choose our own ego, our own desire to be right, or our own pride over the vulnerability of true connection. This brings us to a brilliant visual allegory for this concept, the famous parable of the long spoons. Imagine a massive banquet table loaded with the most incredible delicacies. But everyone sitting at the table has utensils that are far too long to reach their own mouths. In hell, everyone is desperately, selfishly trying to feed themselves, and as a result, they are starving in the presence of a feast. But heaven? Heaven is the exact same room. the exact same table, and the exact same long spoons. The only difference is the action. Instead of trying to feed themselves, the people across the table reach out and feed their neighbors. The environment is identical. The difference between agony and paradise is simply the shift from selfishness to serving others.
Section 3. The Descent into Hades.
If hell is this self-imposed isolation, this inescapable trap of our own ego, how do we get out? This is where ancient theology offers a fascinating rescue mission. In early Christian texts, specifically the book of 1 Peter, there is this strange, super compelling narrative. It talks about Christ dying, but not stopping at the grave. It says he descended into the underworld, into the prison of the dead. The early Christians firmly believed that divine love wasn't passive. It actively pursues us into our darkest, most isolated places. Jesus goes down to where the disobedient are trapped, preaching a word of mercy, physically grasping them and pulling them out of their self-imposed exile. To illustrate this, there's a hauntingly beautiful medieval legend about Judas Iscariot, the ultimate betrayer, who, remember, Dante placed in the absolute lowest circle. The legend says Judas finds himself at the bottom of a deep, pitch-black pit. Step 1. He lies there in absolute darkness for what feels like 1,000,000 years, totally consumed by his own guilt and isolation. Step 2. Far above, he finally spots a tiny, dim light, and it almost seems to be reaching down for him. And Step 3. Something inside him stirs. He slowly, painfully stands up and decides to begin the agonizing climb out of his own despair. The timeline of this legend is staggering. I mean, he lies there for 1,000,000 years, then century after century passes as he climbs the sheer walls of this pit. It's slow, it's excruciating, but here is the beautiful part. As he climbs closer to that light, he actually begins to draw physical strength from it. It fuels his ascent. Finally, after literally an eternity of climbing, he reaches the rim and finds an opening leading out of the darkness. Section 4. Escaping our daily isolation. So the crucial point is this. How does a medieval legend about the underworld apply to you and me right now? We have to bring these grand theological and literary concepts down to our practical, daily struggles. Look, we all find ourselves in dark pits of disconnection. We all get lost in the noise of our own pandemonium. To escape, we have to identify the mindset that traps us. The source material mentions a teenager wearing a t-shirt with a very simple phrase on it. It's all about me. That right there, that is the uniform of the modern underworld. That is the exact mindset we have to shed. If we want to get out of our personal hells, we have to actively take off that metaphorical t-shirt. We've got to stop trying to feed ourselves with the long spoons. And what happens when we do? Let's finish that medieval legend. Judas finally pulls himself over the rim of the pit, fully expecting punishment. Instead, he finds himself in an upper room. A young rabbi is having a meal with his friends. The rabbi walks over, grasps Judas by the wrists, pulls him to his feet, and says, "Judas, welcome. We've been waiting for you. We couldn't have the supper without you." This beautifully illustrates that there is absolutely no frontier of chaos, no depth of isolation that is beyond the reach of grace and human connection. Which leaves us with the ultimate question for this explainer. The door is open, the light is reaching down. Will you choose to stay as a mini monarch, reigning over the noise and chaos of your own private pandemonium? Or will you drop the long spoon, step outside of yourself, and accept the difficult, beautiful work of connection? The choice between heaven and hell might just be the choice you make today. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and I'll see you in the next explainer.